Joe Biden has won the American presidential election.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us.
So Trump lost the US election, and he's no longer the leader of the free world. But as Biden is now the most powerful leader in the West, does this mean the world is now liberal once again? As if we're all suddenly pro-migration, pro-globalism, and people once again trust the establishment to deliver their personal needs? The answer is a big, fat no. Because the events of the last 20 years have eroded away trust in politics so much that it's taken 4 days and many disputes just to announce the leader of the most successful democracy in the world in the most embarrassing election America has ever faced. So what is the West now, and just how powerful and free is it?
Good evening. The last 19 days have been extraordinary ones. As our nation watched, we were all reminded on a daily basis of the importance of each and every vote. We were reminded of the strength of our democracy, that while our system is not always perfect, it is fundamentally strong and far better than any other alternative. The election was close, but tonight, after a count, a recount, and yet another manual recount, Secretary Cheney and I are honored and humbled to have won the state of Florida, which gives us the needed electoral votes to win the election.
There was a time when the democracies of the world all looked largely similar. They'd all gone through political revolutions of some kind, all benefited from the rise in automated manufacturing, and some once had massive empires to become the strongest economies of the world, and they'd all allied either throughout the world wars or as a consequence of the world wars into the EU, NATO and the G7. But there was, and probably always will be, a side of the world which didn't go through that process. In the case of the black community, a side of the world exploited throughout the process of becoming an economic world power. In one act of violence, the US found this out on September 11th, 2001.
Good evening. America came under attack today from international terrorists on a scale that made it more an act of war.
All of a sudden, the West had to ask itself some extremely serious questions. Who was to blame for the attack? How much accommodation can be given to people who don't share the same values as us? And why nearly 3,000 people had to lose their lives? All of a sudden, instead of being this globalist, accommodating, multicultural and progressive unity of nations, the West split into ever-growing fractions of division caused by attacks inspired by the events of 9/11, which still, to this day, carry on. What's that got to do with Trump, you might ask?
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Well, following the events of 9/11, Bush and Blair falsely associated it with Iraq, claiming they had weapons of mass destruction. The media, both here and in the US, spread this lie without questioning it, presenting it as fact. So when it was found out to be untrue, a great deal of trust in the establishment was broken. But it wasn't just that one foreign war which annoyed people, because it led to an Arab uprising.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to talk to you about Syria.
Which meant Afghanistan, Syria, and Libya all became war zones in the coming years as the West tried to intervene to keep peace in those countries. But the more the West intervened, the more fractured those nations became. ISIS formed, the refugee crisis happened in Europe and is still happening, and more terrorist attacks were brought into Europe. If it wasn't for the destabilizing of the Middle East, Britain wouldn't have been persuaded by the argument that leaving the EU would help us control our borders and Brexit wouldn't have happened. If Brexit didn't happen, the US wouldn't have been persuaded that it was possible to defeat the now seemingly corrupt establishment, and Trump wouldn't have been elected. But the second global event to put Trump in power was the 2008 banking crisis, which left many communities economically forgotten.
Well, the advice is to just hold tight, see what happens, keep as much cash as you can, even if it's not very much, just keep as much cash, and you're going to be able to make great deals because there are unbelievable opportunities out there right now. Okay?
And you're expecting to make a few bucks or so?
Well, I've been buying a lot of things, I think very cheaply, but we'll see. Maybe in a year from now I'll tell you I didn't make such a good deal. But I've been buying, and I just started buying, actually. And there are a lot of great opportunities.
China was becoming a world superpower just as world governments had to bring down borrowing and bring in austerity. For many, it was a case of finding a vote that represented the individual rather than this more abstract vision of a world leader. Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, Marine Le Pen, Golden Dawn, Viktor Orban, even Jeremy Corbyn.
And there's a message on that wall for President Donald Trump. And you know what it says? Build bridges, not walls.
There were many world leaders popping up that didn't therefore fit the mould of a typical politician and were really good at speaking to the individual.
This will be a victory for real people, a victory for ordinary people, a victory for decent people.
They created populism, this idea that people come first. Protest movements sprung up, and just as the far right were emboldened, so were the far left. Even if these weren't the majority views of a nation, if it played to a large enough audience on the internet, it could inspire radical change in the political landscape and force the government's hand in one direction or the other.
Where are you from?
BBC.
Okay. Here's another beauty.
It's a good line. Impartial, free and fair.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. President.
Just like CNN, right?
But the reason Trump lost was largely the same reason why Corbyn lost. Both men had poor relationships with the establishment media. Both men were against establishment politics, and both men had ideas sometimes so radical they were easy to unpick by the establishment. Trump offered the nation a wall on the Mexican border, saying that Mexico will pay for it. Corbyn offered the nation free Wi-Fi. Trump denied the lethality of coronavirus. Corbyn denied the existence of anti-Semitism within his party, and both men fell down their own rabbit holes. "We won the argument," said Corbyn. "We haven't lost the election," said Trump. Both men became so convinced, almost deluded, that their argument was right, and so convinced on making radical change that they disputed and denied fact, handing the establishment, the globalist elite, whatever you want to call the other side, handing them the attacks necessary to put blockages in the change these men wanted to make, and it has so far put these men out of power. But it makes you wonder, what other populist ideas can be picked apart and usurped because their leaders, or even the ideas themselves, deny facts with which the establishment believe to be true? Can the same establishment media, which clearly lied about weapons of mass destruction and who lied about Trump's polling, be trusted at all? At what point does holding politicians to account become political interference? The problem with modern politics is that while there is a side of the world who believe the establishment media view, for example, that Brexit is going to be bad for the economy, or that anti-Semitism exists within the Labour Party, or that coronavirus to be real and dangerous threat to the world, there is equally a side who no longer listens to the establishment and who believe the complete opposite. Some would say that these are dangerous racists, deluded, radicalized, stupid people. But as long as these groups exist, politicians have to find a way to engage with these people if they are to unify a country. So now that Biden is president of the US, what will change for the West? I've talked before about how the last decade, most news stories centred around an ism or an obia, whether it be the sexism of Me Too, the xenophobia of US immigration policy, or the racism of American policing. The left obsessed about those isms and obias so much, it forgot about the real issues like the economy, education, and jobs. Ultimately, our happiness is not defined by our race or whatever community we belong to, but by what opportunities we have available to us, and the left forgot that. Hence why Biden only just won. But the deaths caused by coronavirus and Trump's election loss exposed Trump's populism for what it really is. It seemed like he denied fact in pursuit of change, but it became to be known that he was denying fact in pursuit of blind, unquestioned support. Ultimately, populism has died because it's been exposed to be a fake reality, a dream. Unfortunately, every political leader, no matter what kind of background they come from, is capable of breaking promises, and there is no policy which is going to please everybody all of the time. There will always be a political opposition who bite back one day and reverse any changes populism can do. The problem with Biden is that America won't just fall into line and trust the establishment again, as it once did before 9/11. Instead, coronavirus has destroyed what was left of the West's economies. And as we're seeing across Europe, no longer are nations united within themselves. Can an old-fashioned, experienced establishment politician really unify a nation with a mixed economy who communicate via the internet? I doubt it. Instead, politics is changing into momentary internet trends of rage, and the establishment won't be able to keep up. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.